Welcome to the second session of the day, Special Snowflakes, Applying New UX Tools to Library Systems. Will be presented by Shelley Gullikson, Susanna Galbraith, and Krista Godfrey. I apologize if I say any of those names wrong. We'd like to thank the Carleton University, and I'm pretty sure I said that one wrong, for the generous sponsorship of this presentation. Shelley is a web communications and interface design at Carleton University, the library. Prior to this, she worked in various capacities as a librarian and a web manager for the federal government, and as well as a reference and information literacy librarian at Mount Allison University, the Ontario College of Art and Design University, and the University of Alberta. I said that wrong also. Susanna is a virtual services librarian at McMaster University's Health Sciences Library. She grew up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and envisioned at a young age that her future career would involve computers and books. Susanna's professional interests include front-end web and web usability, user experience, and marketing for libraries. Krista is a web services librarian at Memorial University, where she concentrates on the library website, usability testing, user experience, and mobile library resources. Krista is a passionate speaker and has spoken internationally on a wide range of topics. She loves to engage with users, explore emerging technologies, tinker with instructional technologies, and constantly strives to improve the user experience. She has been on the Atlantic Provinces Library Association executive and is a former OLITA president. Please join me in welcoming Shelley, Susanna, and Krista.
So, since we were all introduced in a group, that's Susanna, that's Krista, and I'm Shelley. And today we're going to talk about a project where the three of us use the same ethnographic methods for user research at each of our libraries. And then we use the results of that ethnographic research to design a single usability test that we each carried out. So we'll talk about our results, but also about the experience of using ethnographic methods and whether it's useful to share UX research protocols and results in this way, or if our libraries and users are just too different. But first, what possessed us to do this? So the three of us met at the UX Libs conference in Cambridge this year, and it wasn't all fun and twilight punting on the cam with champagne, though that was pretty great. It was actually quite an intense immersion in learning about and then trying a variety of user research methods rooted in ethnography, and then analyzing our results and designing service solutions to improve user experience. We were all a little bit in love with the whole experience, I think, and we really wanted to try some of the new to us UX research methods in our own institutions to see how they worked. So ethnography, for those of you who don't know, is all about building up an understanding of the culture of a specific group of people. So it absolutely makes sense to draw on ethnographic methods to know your user. And we know we need to know our users in order to provide good user experience. Now, the context of our users is vital to understanding them. And we all have, even in academic libraries, we all have different contexts. Our universities might be research intensive or comprehensive or liberal arts focused. Maybe we're on residential campuses or commuter campuses. Our universities might have a large proportion of first-generation students or international students. And these contexts can really impact how our universities work. But do they have a big impact on how students are using our libraries? If I do ethnographic research into Carleton students' use of the library, am I only learning about Carleton students, or am I perhaps also building up a picture of university students as a whole? Could Susanna apply what I learned in her health sciences library at McMaster, or are we just too different? Does a Carleton student use the library in a way that is completely unlike a student at Memorial? Is there something about their Carletonness that can't be disregarded? Are they special snowflakes?
Oh God, this thing is huge. Okay. So why ethnography? Well, this is really at least my driving force, and I think it is for all of us. What we want to do is make good decisions, and we want to make decisions that are going to improve the library and the experience for our users. So ethnographic techniques is one way to make sure that we are creating those improvements. All right, next. How does this thing work? Next, there we go. We all know we are not our patrons. It's been drilled into us, I think, by now. But what we want to do is make sure that we get the full picture of what works and doesn't work in our library. We want to make sure that we understand the motivations of our students. Ethnography is about watching and listening to our users in our spaces, using our resources, and kind of getting a better understanding of that motivation. So we often design with the best intentions, but often without the full picture. And user experience often takes into account the many aspects: usability, findability, desirability, etc. But ethnographic techniques can kind of tell you about the circumstances users go through before they even interact with us online, and tell us about our users' needs that maybe we weren't even aware of. Unlike usability, where we often decide what to test and then fix it, ethnographic techniques is about watching and listening to our users, finding out where the problems are after viewing them, and then making decisions on what to fix based on what we've seen. This was the hardest part for me. I do a lot of usability testing. I go in with a question in mind. I get them to do their task. I find out if it works or not. If it works, great. If not, fix it. But just listening and not having a preconceived idea beforehand was really hard for me. So some of us might be familiar with ethnographic techniques for other things like space issues. We often observe our students in our spaces and then make decisions based on where their decision points are, their paths, etc. So we wanted to see if we could use ethnographic techniques on library systems. So the methods that we used, there are a number of ethnographic methods. Observation, of course, is key. It's key in usability testing as well. You need to consider what's happening, things like activities, environment, interactions, objects, the users themselves, who is actually in your library doing what pathways are they using, what tools are they using, what are they interacting with, who are they interacting with. But remember, observation, it can be intrusive, and being seen can change people's reactions, so just keep that in mind. What we concentrated on were using three types, really: interviews, mapping, and letter writing. So we used a combination of these three. Our interviewing was a little more informal in nature. We didn't have a set of questions when we were doing the mapping activity. And that's so that we could do a more probing question. And by doing an informal interview, it allows them to use their own words rather than answering a question in what might be our words and our terminologies. So we wanted to make sure that they were talking about it the way they would. Mapping, this was a really fun activity. So there are basically two kinds of mapping. There's mapping spaces, or cognitive mapping, where it's a really neat staff activity. If you do it with your students, get them to map out the library, and then get your staff to map out the library, you can see what is important to each group and how different they are. How quickly did staff draw the staff spaces, and staff space doesn't show up at all on a student map. So it's a really neat way to kind of get a sense of what's important to the user, where their decision points are, where they get stuck. We asked them to map out their research process. So we asked them to map out the process from the beginning of the assignment. So your prof tells you to write a 3,000-word paper on X in 3 weeks' time. So from the beginning of that all the way to when they would hand it in. And they had to map that out. And we'll talk about our results in a second here. The other thing that we did was love letters or breakup letters. And this is kind of a fun thing to do, kind of a fun way to figure out what they like, what they don't like, and why. So the nice thing about love letters and breakup letters is we're all probably very familiar with them. It's a concept that's understood. And the other nice thing is because you're writing to a thing or a service, not to a person, you can be a little more frank, a little more open. You don't have to worry about offending people. And the letters can reveal relationships about the user with these things, and we can also sometimes learn about workarounds when they're writing these letters. So overall results, I'd say generally both the mapping and the letters went pretty well. Most of the students got the concepts pretty quickly, and it was different from what they were normally asked to do, so that was kind of a nice break from the normal survey that we're asking them to do, our usability test. So my results, again, the hardest part for me was not actually having a question. Would I use it again? I think I would when I didn't already have a list of known item things that I need to change. It did give me a better sense of motivations, how they do research in the bigger picture of the process. So this is an example of one of the maps that was done. This is actually my favorite map. Most of them were workflows. It was kind of more like words with an arrow going on. This is what I did. I got the paper. I went to Google, etc. So this was a fun one. She decided to do it as a more like a comic. What I found in this is that it was split between starting at the website, our library website, and our library resources and going to Google. They often changed resources if they didn't find something that they wanted right away. They would give up and move on. And most were working from home, so they weren't even in the library talking, so talking to a librarian wasn't an option. They weren't ever really looking for help. The letters were a little less useful, I found. I found the maps gave me a really good picture of process and motivation. The letters were interesting and fun, but I didn't get as much of a motivation from it. I think I got rickrolled in this one. Thanks for never giving up on me and never letting me down. I'm not sure. So I don't know how serious this one was. It was interesting because I expected a lot of breakup letters, and the majority were love letters, which I found interesting and surprising. Some were neither. Some didn't quite get the concept, so it was like, I forgive you. You did a website redesign, and I can't find anything. And I miss you. I can't find the resource I want. So not quite what we're looking for. Still interesting to see what they're finding issues with. I was hoping for more breakup letters so that we could hear more about the workarounds. I was really interested in finding out what people were doing when they couldn't find what they wanted. So that's our results, and we'll move on to McMaster's.
So at the Health Sciences Library at McMaster, I recruited a variety of students from different programs, different levels of experience, different years, undergraduate, graduate. And similar to Krista, almost all of them did sort of something like this, a flow chart. What I found was that all of the students I spoke with had a very systematic process for doing their research. They developed it completely on their own, with the exception of one person who said she'd had a few tips from her prof that she valued highly. The students I spoke with all described starting in either Google or Google Scholar to gain background information on their topic, and then they either continued to use Google Scholar or they jumped right into a library database. In all cases, the library of database was Web of Science. What was good news was that they didn't recollect having any technical issues with accessing articles. Their general impression was that they were satisfied with McMaster libraries. And this was interesting because they said this as though they were really proud to belong to McMaster, and who would doubt the quality of McMaster University's research library. But they also sort of wondered if maybe there was more they could learn to make their research process easier or faster. One student in particular described sifting through a lot of search results in Google Scholar, trying to find good articles, and she found it very time-consuming. But despite this, this one student and none of the other students mentioned going to the library or anyone for help. So when I did the love and breakup letters, actually, my experience was that most of the students were somewhat uncomfortable with the idea of doing this, with the exception of one who just didn't blink an eye and just wrote a letter. But in the end, they seemed sort of proud of what they'd written, and they were happy to share it. I did find that maybe as a result of them feeling somewhat self-conscious about actually writing a letter, like Krista said, it wasn't as revealing to me as the mapping exercise. It was almost like they were distracted by the craft of writing something than actually producing something that reflected their true experience. But what it did provide was a peek into how they understood the tool that they were writing about and any knowledge gaps that they had. So, for example, it exposed misunderstandings they had with the interfaces they were using. So Google Scholar always charges me, or Web of Science doesn't always have the PDFs that I want. So this was revealing because it was in contrast to what they'd said in the mapping exercise, that they had no trouble accessing articles, or that they always find what they need at McMaster. So it was as though they believed the issue was the fault of the tool, like Web of Science or Google Scholar, and they didn't see that it was the fault of the library's collections or access to the collections. Now on to Carleton.
So I think the students who I worked with actually probably liked the process maybe more than Krista and Susanna found. I found they really quite enjoyed it. This was another similar sort of stick figure cartoon of one of the participants. And this particular participant really loved doing the drawing. He got such a kick out of it. He was, we were talking about his process as he was going along, and I said, you don't have to worry about drawing that bit. And he just looked at me, he said, oh, I am going to draw this. So, okay. And this is the first letter I got. Unlike Krista, I got mostly breakup letters. This was my only love letter. And this was the first one, and I was so excited after she wrote this. She got the concept and had so much fun with it. And if you can't read it, it's to my dearest Macodrum library search engine, which she meant summon, and it starts off, "How I cherish thee," which when I mentioned this to my colleagues, they were quite stunned, but found it very compelling. I know a picture's worth 1,000 words. A love letter is worth, 1,000 pages of analytics. It was very, very compelling for my colleagues. Overall, with the letters and the mapping, I saw, maybe surprisingly, that the students did use library databases or Summon, although they seemed to only use one. So they'd use a database or they'd use Summon, and then move on to Google Scholar, but they would never move on to another library database or another library resource. So if they started in a library database, they wouldn't move to Summon. If they started in Summon, they wouldn't move to a database. They wouldn't go from one database to another. They'd just zip over to Google Scholar. This excerpt from one of the breakup letters, "I stayed because I didn't know better," seemed relevant to quite a few of the experiences that my participants described. They stick with that single database, or in some cases, their admittedly bad search strategies because they didn't know better. But they also don't do anything, like, for instance, seek help to get to a point where they might know better in the future. So once we were all done, our various ethnographic research projects, we shared pictures of our maps and our letters and what the participants had told us to see what we had in common. And so I'm sure as we've been talking, you can guess that one of the things was help, or rather lack of help seeking. Both the maps and the letters showed a research process that did not include librarians, either in person providing help or through guides or instruction. The letters showed that students would persist to the point of frustration, often past the point of frustration in the breakup letters, but they wouldn't seek help. So for our usability test, we decided to look at whether our interfaces could maybe play a role in this. Perhaps different labeling or placement could do something to encourage help seeking.
So given our various levels of access to changing our interfaces, we decided that we couldn't test the placement consistently, so we went with changing a label. We looked at the words that students had used in their letters and describing in their research process and thought we'd try "can't find what you're looking for" as an alternate label for help. At Carleton and Memorial, it was added to the Summons search results screen, and at McMaster, it was added to a LibGuides search results screen. A difficult task was assigned to each participant in an attempt to push them towards help. After a short time, we prompted them to remind them to complete the task as though they were doing an assignment. The overall results, none of the participants clicked on the link, "Can't find what you're looking for." Even after significant difficulty, even after being prompted to treat this as though they were doing an actual assignment, and again, even after they were prompted to look for help on the page. At Carleton and Memorial, where they had an actual help link beside the "can't find what you're looking for," and their search results also included facets, a few people did click on the help link, but most tended to look to the facets for help. And at McMaster, a few admitted they would just go to Google for help. Whoops. Sorry, those are supposed to be hidden. So what did we learn from all of this? So we tried a solution, we tested it, but the label change didn't change their help-seeking behavior. In the case of the two libraries who had a clear help link, they were still reluctant to click it. This leads us to believe that maybe a label change did not solve our particular problem. Maybe if we changed the placement, it would have solved our problem, but maybe another lesson is that we can't always solve a problem that we find using ethnographic research with an interface change. Maybe there's a bigger problem, or maybe it's just something that we can't even solve. Maybe it's human nature. Perhaps the people that we spoke with just like a good challenge and are averse to asking anyone for help. So with all of these maybes, it suggests in our case we need to learn more. And all of this points to the importance of iteration. So we identified a problem, we tested a solution, it didn't solve our problem, maybe we need to do more research to learn what else is going on. So would we use ethnographic techniques again to learn about our students and how they use our interfaces? Of course we would. In our case, if we'd only done usability testing without knowing that students are reluctant to seek help from anyone in general, we may have kept changing our label, trying to find the right words, whereas now we've been given pause to wonder, maybe the label doesn't make that much difference if this is their behavior, regardless of the words. The ethnographic research has helped strengthen this view and broaden our understanding to think more creatively about different solutions. A quote from Erica Hall that I like on the value of qualitative research: by asking why, we can see the opportunity for something better beyond the bounds of the current best. So what about our special snowflake question at the beginning? So we found that when it comes to the big picture, there were clear and obvious similarities between all of our participants. Maybe it's the nature of doing ethnographic research which puts the focus on having an empathetic understanding of the person's experience that sort of brings to the surface the human nature aspects of the research process. So across all of our institutions, different programs, different subjects, different levels of experience, all of the people that we spoke with like to ask friends for help before anyone else. They also always take the easiest route and go with what's familiar. So whether it was Google Scholar, Web of Science, or Summon, they seem to just keep using the same tool rather than trying something new. And of course, they go with what they trust, Google. So our library's special snowflakes. On some level, of course, they are different. They all have different contexts, like Shelley described earlier, and it's important to understand that. But there's also a lot within their experiences that they share. And so this project allowed us to see that when we do our own ethnographic research, there's a lot that we can learn from that and share. Does anyone have questions?
I'll repeat the question, I'll attempt to repeat the question. If you were to do the ethnographic study again, would you focus on where they're getting help?
Sure. I don't know if I've got a really good answer for this. Yes. I think this project for us was really kind of to test out ethnographic techniques, and I think what we found is that they do provide us a lot more background and understanding on what our users are actually doing and what they're doing before they even get to us, which I think we concentrate on what they do when they get to the website. Well, what are they doing beforehand, and is there something that we need to be thinking about when they get to our site, because they've already tried everything else? So is there something that we need to do? So yes, I would say for sure I'd be interested in doing an ethnographic study on, finding out what that help is. I'm not sure exactly what techniques I use to pull that out, but I think it's definitely a question worth asking.
The first question is, how do you decide on the specifics? And the second one was, did you pair up with any anthropology departments in your organizations?
We were really interested in trying out some of the specific techniques we learned about at the conference, and there were a few that were pretty great. I think the love letter, breakup letter really grabbed all of us when we heard about that, and I actually during the conference I had a chance to use that technique. We had a chance to do user research at the conference, and there were some really fantastic and compelling letters. So I was really excited to do that one again. It was interesting to try to think about which ones we wanted to use, but I think what we had always planned to do a usability study as well, in conjunction, to see how sort of they were different, since usability studies was what we were more familiar with. So part of our choice was choosing something that we thought could lead us to conclusions that would lead to a usability test. So something like a photographic essay of what's in your bag, which is really fun, but it probably wouldn't lead us to usability in the same way. So that was, and the mapping was great too. We were all in a workshop at this conference where we did the mapping technique, and it's fantastic. It can be really, really fun. So mostly, I guess, we picked the ones that were most fun. And as for partnering with an anthropology department, we really wanted to test these things ourselves, and do this in the library. I would say for sure, personally, if I was going to do a large ethnographic study, it would be very useful to pair with someone who knew what they were doing. Is there anything else? Okay.
The question is, can they talk about the ethics review of this type of research?
Yeah, so I work in a health sciences library. So because I was going to be doing this study on people in the Faculty of Health Sciences, I had to do a pretty thorough ethics review, which took a fair bit of time. And it was sort of, what we did was sort of borderline quality assurance, was what their sort of outcome was. But in the end, it was something that did need to go through like they couldn't quite decide, but they did decide, yes, this does need ethics approval. Was there anything else in particular you wanted to know about it, or? Right. Yeah, I think for mine, I just described exactly what we were going to do, and that was no problem. I didn't have to say the exact questions. Did you do that?
Yeah, I just, my ethics people came back to me with a couple of things that they wanted clarified, including for the letter, they were concerned about people feeling like they would be judged on the basis of their writing. So I had to add a sentence in my protocol, just specifying that the quality of the writing was not something that was being looked at. It was content. So there was some back and forth. It really depends on your institution, and like Krista didn't have to do an ethics thing at all. So, but it's good to know what your institution does require, so you can anticipate, because that will make it go through faster if you can anticipate what they might come back at you with, and just get that as much as possible in your application right away. I had done an application for a previous project, so there was happily a lot of cutting and pasting, which made it go a little smoother.
That wraps it up. I'll speak out of order and say you can contact them on the email addresses that they left on the slide. Thank you very much.